Dr. No exploded onto screens in 1962 and lit the fuse on a new kind of cinematic myth, introducing the world to James Bond and the man who defined him first and best, Sean Connery. The tuxedo, the raised eyebrow, the easy menace that felt like silk and steel at once. It all began here, and it made Connery a global archetype. But icons cast long shadows. Away from the red carpets, Connery's own words about striking women, first printed in a 1965 Playboy interview and later pressed by Barbara Walters on television, left a stain that never quite faded, forcing admirers to reckon with the rift between charisma and conviction. There was friction behind the franchise, too. Connery bristled at the machine that minted him, feuding with the producers who built Bond even as his performance sold the legend to the world, a professional love story edged with resentment and control. And then, years after the last martini, the myth fell quiet. He withdrew to the Bahamas, a private final act far from studios and flashbulbs, and in 2020 he died at home at the age of 90, leaving behind a legacy both gleaming and troubled, a hero whose halo never quite hid the heat beneath. Sean Connery was not born into glamour. He entered the world in 1930 in the working-class tenements of Fountainbridge, Edinburgh. The son of a factory worker and a cleaning woman, he left school at 13 to help support his family, working odd jobs from milkman to coffin polisher. His rugged looks, physical strength, and unmistakable Scottish presence became his ticket out. In 1962, Connery donned the tuxedo in Dr. No, becoming the very first cinematic James Bond. The film was a gamble, low budget, untested, but Connery's mix of danger and wit crystallized a character who would dominate popular culture for decades. Audiences instantly accepted him as 007, suave yet lethal, aristocratic yet working-class tough. This was more than a role, it was a transformation. Within a few years, Connery became one of the most recognized men on the planet, and the James Bond franchise exploded into a global phenomenon. But the success carried a cost. While the world saw him as the perfect spy, behind the scenes, Connery was already struggling with the weight of fame, the studio's control, and a reputation that would cling to him far longer than he wanted. After the thunderclap success of Dr. No, Sean Connery reprised James Bond in a string of films that defined the 1,960 seconds, from Russia with Love, Goldfinger, Thunderball, and You Only Live Twice. Each performance cemented him not only as the quintessential Bond, but also as a global symbol of sophistication and danger. Audiences adored his cool menace, while critics praised the authenticity he brought to a role that might otherwise have been pure fantasy. Yet Connery refused to be trapped by the tuxedo. He sought out roles that proved his range. A rugged adventurer in The Man Who Would Be King, a world-weary father in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and a grizzled mentor in Highlander. His gravitas only deepened with age, and in 1988, he won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for his role as a tough Irish cop in The Untouchables. By the 1,990 seconds, Connery had become a box office force again with The Hunt for Red October and The Rock. His career spanned more than 5 decades, touching nearly every genre: spy thrillers, fantasy epics, historical dramas, and action blockbusters. Through it all, Sean Connery cultivated the image of a man who was both artist and star, able to elevate pulp into prestige. To millions, he wasn't just Bond. He was the definition of timeless masculinity on screen. Behind the charisma, Connery carried shadows that refused to fade. One of the deepest stains came from his own words. In a 1965 Playboy interview, he declared that hitting a woman could be acceptable in certain circumstances. Decades later, in 1987, when Barbara Walters pressed him on television, he repeated the sentiment with chilling calm. These statements haunted him, sparking outrage and shaping how many viewed him outside the screen. There were battles behind the camera, too. Connery clashed bitterly with Bond producers over money and creative control. He felt underpaid compared to the billions the franchise raked in, and he accused the studio of exploiting him. At one point, he confessed openly, "I have always hated James Bond." To the public, he was 007 forever. To Connery, the role was both a blessing and a prison. Rumors followed him about his temper and difficult personality. Journalists described him as guarded, often combative with the press. Friends spoke of his pride and stubborn independence traits that fueled his success, but also isolated him. And though admired for his marriages, especially his decades-long union with Micheline Roquebrune, whispers of infidelity and control lingered around his private life. The man hailed as the ultimate gentleman spy was, in truth, far more complicated, sometimes troublingly so. By the early 2000s, Sean Connery had walked away from Hollywood. After his final starring role in The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, 2003, he quietly retired from acting, frustrated with studio politics and increasingly disenchanted with modern filmmaking. He and his wife, painter Micheline Roquebrune, retreated to the Bahamas. There, far from the cameras, Connery lived a life of seclusion. Golf mornings, art-filled afternoons, and only rare glimpses at public events. Fans who once saw him as the face of global espionage now had to imagine him behind the gates of his Nassau estate. On the 31st of October 2020, the world awoke to the news. Sean Connery had died in his sleep at age 90. The official cause was pneumonia and heart failure, complicated by dementia. Admirers grieved, remembering a titan of cinema. Yet his passing carried an air of mystery. Connery had faded so completely from public life that many were stunned by how quietly his final years had unfolded. Then came the questions. How much was James Bond himself truly worth? Estimates of Connery's fortune ranged wildly from $120 million to over $350 million. The secrecy surrounding his estate fueled speculation, fitting for a man who spent his life embodying a spy. Even in death, Sean Connery left the world guessing. Sean Connery's story is one of dazzling triumphs and unsettling shadows. He was the man who gave life to James Bond, shaping cinema's most enduring spy. He was also the Oscar-winning actor who proved he could transcend the role that defined him. Yet, away from the lights, he left behind remarks that damaged his reputation, conflicts that exposed his stubborn pride, and a legacy tinged with contradiction. When he died in 2020, headlines celebrated a legend, but whispers reminded the world of a darker side that could never be erased. His estate, shrouded in secrecy, has been valued anywhere between $120 million and $350 million, a fortune as enigmatic as the man himself. And so the question remains, was Sean Connery truly the perfect James Bond? Or was James Bond simply the perfect mask he wore?